If the grocery store shut down tomorrow, the protein in your pantry wouldn't last as long as you think. That's the uncomfortable part. Most people picture canned meat when they think about long-term food storage. Stacks of it, lined up in a closet somewhere. Like that's the gold standard. It has nothing to do with how much you've prepared or how seriously you take this. The real problem is that almost nobody talks about what actually outlasts canned meat. By years, sometimes by a decade or more. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which 5 plant proteins can sit in your pantry for 10 years or longer, cost a fraction of what canned meat costs, and still deliver everything your body needs to keep going. Think about your own kitchen for a second. Maybe there's a shelf with a few cans, some rice, whatever was on sale last time you stocked up. It feels like enough. It feels responsible even. And by the end of this video, that feeling is going to change completely. Here's the number that should stick with you. Properly stored, certain dried legumes can remain safe to eat for over 30 years. Not 3, not 13, 30. Compare that to canned meat, which starts losing quality after 2 to 5 years on the shelf, even when it's stored well. That's the gap nobody mentions. And it's not just about time. A pound of canned beef can run you $8 to $12. A pound of dried lentils costs around $2. You're not just buying more shelf life, you're buying it for a quarter of the price, sometimes less. There's also the weight problem. Canned protein is heavy and it takes up space fast. If you've ever tried to carry a case of canned meat up a flight of stairs, you know exactly what I mean. Dried legumes weigh almost nothing by comparison, and they pack into a fraction of the space. For anyone thinking about what happens if you ever needed to grab your supplies and move, that difference matters more than people realize. And there's a third cost that almost never gets mentioned: rotation. Canned meat has a clock on it. 2 years in, maybe 3, you're supposed to be eating through it and replacing it, or you're quietly losing money on cans that sit there, going soft in quality while you forget they exist. Dried legumes don't ask that of you. You can store them once and, if you do it right, not think about them again for a very long time. So this isn't really a meat problem, it's a planning problem. Most people are storing the wrong kind of protein for the wrong reasons, spending more, carrying more weight, and managing a rotation schedule they didn't sign up for, and they don't find out until it's too late to fix it cheaply. If this is already making you rethink what's sitting in your pantry, go ahead and hit subscribe right now. I break down practical food storage systems like this every single week, and you're going to want to see what comes next. Because in a minute, I'm going to walk you through the 5 plant proteins that actually beat canned meat at its own game. Some of them you probably already have in your kitchen and don't even realize how powerful they are. One of them, especially the last one on this list, isn't something most people have even heard of. And it might end up changing how you think about your entire pantry. None of this is new. People have leaned on dried legumes for thousands of years. In places where running out of food wasn't hypothetical, it was the thing that kept you up at night. Dry climates, unpredictable harvests, no refrigeration, no supermarket down the street to bail you out. So they figured out, through trial and a lot of error, which foods could carry them through a bad season and which ones couldn't. For decades, that kind of knowledge just sort of faded out. Grocery stores got bigger, supply chains got faster, and storing your own food started to feel old-fashioned, like something your grandparents worried about but you didn't have to. Canned goods took over because they were convenient and heavily marketed. The older knowledge didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because nobody needed it anymore, until slowly people started needing it again. And the reason it works so well today is exactly the same reason it worked back then. Dried legumes are stable, cheap to produce, and don't need power or refrigeration to stay edible for years. That math hasn't changed in centuries, even if most people forgot to check it. So let's actually go through the list. 5 plant proteins ranked by how well they hold up over time, starting with the one you've probably got sitting in your cupboard right now without thinking twice about it. Number 5 is the dried lentil. It doesn't look like much. Small, brown or green, easy to overlook next to a shelf of canned chicken. But lentils are doing something most foods can't. Packing around 26 grams of protein per 100 grams alongside fiber and iron into something that costs next to nothing and barely needs any preparation. No soaking required. Rinse and simmer for 20 minutes and you've got a complete meal base. Stored properly, sealed away from oxygen and moisture, kept cool and dark, lentils can remain good for 15, 20, even 30 years. That's the kind of number you see in long-term storage studies and survivalist food caches alike. They're the entry point on this list for a reason. Cheap, reliable, almost boringly dependable. But here's the part most people get wrong. They stop at lentils and assume that's the whole solution. It isn't. Lentils are step 1, not the system. Number 4 brings us to dried beans and soybeans, and this is where things start to get interesting. Beans have quietly been a pillar of food security across dozens of cultures, not because they're trendy, but because they store well, cook into almost anything, and deliver serious protein per pound. Black beans, pinto beans, kidney beans, pick your favorite, the storage math barely changes, but soybeans deserve their own spotlight. Unlike most plant proteins, soy contains all 9 essential amino acids, a trait most people assume only meat has. Gram for gram, soybeans pack one of the highest protein concentrations of any traditional plant food, sitting around 36 grams per 100 grams, and that connects directly to what we just covered with lentils. Lentils give you a fast, cheap protein base. Beans and soy add density and completeness, covering the amino acid gaps that lentils alone can't fully close. Together, they already look less like 2 separate foods and more like the first 2 pieces of something bigger. But there's still a gap. Something that handles the in-between, foods that store just as long, but bring a different kind of flexibility. That's exactly where we're headed next. Number 3 on this list is split peas and chickpeas, and this is where the system starts pulling double duty. Both of these can sit in storage for years without refrigeration, asking for almost nothing in return. Just protection from heat, light, and moisture. That's it. No special equipment, no rotating schedule you have to manage every few months. Split peas bring around 25 grams of protein per 100 grams, and they break down into a thick, hearty base almost on their own, which makes them a quiet favorite in long-term storage circles. Chickpeas hold a similar protein profile, but they bring something the others don't. Texture. Roasted, mashed, simmered into something thicker, they adapt to whatever the moment calls for. This isn't just something people assume works. Long-term food storage studies have tracked dried legumes like these for decades, and humanitarian relief programs have relied on split peas and chickpeas as core components of emergency food reserves for just as long. When an organization is responsible for feeding thousands of people with food that has to survive unpredictable shipping times and unpredictable storage conditions, they don't gamble on convenience. They go with what's proven. And what's proven, over and over, in study after study, is exactly what's sitting at number 3 on this list. Think about that for a second. These aren't theoretical numbers pulled from a lab somewhere. These are foods that real organizations, feeding real people in real crisis situations, have come back to again and again because nothing else does the job as reliably for the price. Here's where it gets interesting though. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and drop a comment telling me which one of these 5 surprised you the most so far. I read every single one, and I want to know if you've already got any of these in your pantry without realizing what they're capable of. Because what we've covered so far, lentils, beans, soy, split peas, chickpeas, they're not just 5 separate items sitting on a shelf. They're building something. Lentils give you speed and low cost. Beans and soy add density and amino acid completeness. Split peas and chickpeas bring texture and proven reliability under real-world stress. Each one closes a gap the last one left open. That's not an accident. That's what a real food storage system looks like. Not one hero food doing everything, but several doing what they're each best at. But none of that is the part most people miss completely. The biggest gap in most people's pantry isn't variety. It's efficiency. How much usable protein you're actually getting per dollar, per pound, per square foot of shelf space you have available. And there's one food on this list that solves that equation better than anything we've talked about so far. Better than the lentils, better than the beans, better honestly than most people would ever guess. It's not flashy, it's not something you'll find featured on a cooking show. But once you understand what it actually is and how it's made, you'll probably wonder why it isn't sitting in every single pantry that claims to be prepared for anything. That's number 1. And we're getting there next. I know what you might be thinking right now. This sounds like a lot to change. Sorting through legumes, figuring out storage methods, replacing something you've been buying for years without a second thought. Honestly, I thought the exact same thing the first time someone told me canned meat wasn't the answer I assumed it was. I used to have a closet full of it. Cans stacked 3 deep, expiration dates I wasn't tracking closely enough. Money I'd spent without really thinking about whether it was the smartest way to spend it. I remember pulling a few cans out one weekend, checking the dates, and realizing 2 of them had already passed their prime. Not spoiled exactly, but past the point where I'd trust them in an emergency. That felt like wasted money sitting right there on the shelf. So I started looking into other options, mostly out of frustration. I wasn't trying to become some kind of prepping expert. I just didn't want to keep throwing money at something that quietly expired while I wasn't paying attention, and I was skeptical, honestly. Dried beans felt like the kind of thing you store and then forget how to cook properly. The kind of thing that ends up sitting there just as unused as the cans did. But once I actually started rotating a few of these into regular meals, not even for storage purposes at first, just because lentil soup is genuinely good, something shifted. I wasn't managing an expiration countdown anymore. I was managing a pantry that quietly outlasted everything I'd been worried about before. A few years in, the difference is hard to ignore. I'm spending less per pound of protein than I ever did on canned meat. My storage space holds roughly 3 times what it used to because dried legumes simply take up less room. And I haven't thrown out a single bag of spoiled lentils or chickpeas, not once in all that time. I wasn't working harder at this. I was finally working with the right system instead of against it. Now, here's where most people trip up when they try to do this themselves. The first mistake is storing legumes in their original packaging. Paper bags and thin plastic let in moisture and pests over time, which quietly destroys shelf life. The fix is simple. Transfer everything into airtight containers, ideally with oxygen absorbers if you're storing in bulk. The second mistake is ignoring temperature. People assume any dark cabinet will do, but heat speeds up degradation fast. A pantry that hits 90 degrees in summer cuts your storage life dramatically compared to a cool basement or closet. The third mistake is buying in bulk before testing how you actually like to cook with something. I've seen people order 50 pounds of a legume they've never prepared a single meal with, only to realize months later they don't enjoy the texture or the prep time. And the fourth mistake, the one almost nobody expects, assuming dried legumes alone are a complete system. They're close, but not quite. There's one product that closes the final gap, and most people have never even put it on their radar. Number 1 is textured vegetable protein, usually just called TVP, made from defatted soy that's been processed into a dry, shelf-stable form. It doesn't get much attention online, but in survivalist circles and humanitarian aid programs, it's treated almost like a quiet secret. When packaged correctly, sealed away from oxygen and moisture, the same way you treat the legumes we already talked about, TVP can last well beyond 20 years without losing its nutritional value. What makes it different from everything else on this list is the combination. It carries around 50 grams of protein per 100 grams, more than double what most dried legumes offer. It weighs almost nothing, since most of the water has already been removed during processing. And it rehydrates in minutes, turning into something that can stand in for ground meat in almost any recipe you'd normally make. Chili, tacos, pasta sauce. It absorbs whatever flavor you're cooking with, which is part of why people who've used it for years rarely go back to relying only on canned meat again. That's the piece that was missing. Lentils gave you speed. Beans and soy gave you completeness. Split peas and chickpeas gave you proven reliability. TVP gives you density. The most protein in the least weight for the longest time, at the lowest cost per serving. Put all 5 together and you're not looking at 5 random pantry items anymore. You're looking at a system that quietly outperforms canned meat in almost every category that actually matters. So picture your pantry a year from now, built around this instead. You open the cabinet and there's no clutter of heavy cans crowding the shelf, no expiration dates you're scrambling to track every few months, just sealed containers, organized, light enough to carry in one trip if you ever needed to. You know exactly how long everything will last because you checked once and didn't have to think about it again. There's a kind of quiet you don't expect from something as simple as food storage. The quiet of not worrying about it anymore. Maybe it's a random Tuesday and the power flickers for a few hours, or a storm rolls through and the roads are bad for a couple of days. Instead of scrambling, you just open the cabinet, grab what you need, and start cooking like it's any other night. No panic, no math in your head about what's about to expire. Just lentil soup, or chili made with rehydrated TVP, tasting exactly like the meat-based version you grew up with. Except this time, you know the pantry behind it could carry you for years, not weeks. That's not just convenience, that's peace of mind you can actually feel. The kind that comes from knowing you didn't overspend, didn't overpack, and didn't get talked into believing canned meat was your only real option. If this changed how you think about protein storage, go ahead and subscribe, hit that like button, it genuinely helps more than you'd expect. And tell me in the comments, which of these 5 are you adding to your pantry first? I want to hear it.